Marcello, you describe a lot of suffering around the world. But I want you to talk a little bit about the ordeals you yourself went through. You went to 8 different districts around the world. Do you want to remind us quickly just what each one of the, where were each one of the walls? Where they exist?
I started in the Western Sahara with the berm that the Moroccans built. I went then to Ceuta and Melilla, which are these very strange cities that belong to Spain but are in North Africa and are surrounded by this impressive fencing system. I traveled to the Indian-Bangladesh border, to the West Bank again, to the US-Mexico border, to Cyprus, the capital city of Cyprus, to Belfast, and then to a fence that divides a couple of communities in Montreal.
Yeah, I'm going to get you to talk about that. That's the one most of us don't know about. Why? What on earth gave you the idea to put yourself through this?
You know, the flippant answer, I guess, is that as a travel writer, all I really want is an itinerary. And here's a you know, looking at the walls of the world provided just that, a fantastic list of places to visit. But I think on a more emotional level, it started off when I visited. I've been to Israel, Palestine a few times. The first time before the wall, and I remember walking on Christmas Eve from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and which sounds very kind of biblical and pilgrimage-like, but really it's just a walk along the highway for 90 minutes. But what was remarkable is that we couldn't tell at the time where Bethlehem ended. Sorry, where Jerusalem ended and Bethlehem began. The two cities were their sister cities, or were, and kind of blended. The borders blended. I didn't know I was in Bethlehem until I started to see Christmas trees. But when I returned a few years later, then the wall was there, and I was struck. I mean, we'd all seen pictures of it, read about it in the news, but to stand next to it, you're struck by this audacity of it, its immensity, its physicality, and I wondered, what does it mean? What would it be like to live right up against that? And so that's what started it. That was the initial inspiration, and then it was finding ones around the world that I went to see. My initial book proposal was ridiculous. I think I had 15 places. I would still be writing it.
So how many years did you travel and research?
From conception to publication in 4.5 years. I spent, if I added up all the travel, I think it was 47 weeks away. It was a long project. In the middle of it, I had a kid. My first child was born in the middle of that, so it slowed it down. But yeah, it was 47 weeks away.
Now, sometimes you witnessed, or even participated in, some violence. You were present in street riots in Palestine, in Belfast as well. I mean, when I say participated, I don't
not
mean,
quite.
You didn't throw any rocks, but you were on the street.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were very honest. You're very honest in your writing about your biases in those situations, about sympathies for one side or another, but also about your fear, what you're going through in the moment. So tell me, what was your scariest moment in writing this book, in researching the book?
I was at 3 anti-wall demonstrations in Palestine where there was tear gas and rubber bullets and sound grenades. I was at a riot in Belfast where cars were burned and all of this. But honestly, the most frightened I was just walking along the street one Saturday or Sunday morning in Belfast and coming and seeing approaching me a group of young drunk men. And it was something about that city that had quickly infected me, I suppose, with a kind of wall disease, where I was so worried about potential violence. I was always in Belfast concerned with what side of what wall, what side of what peace line I was at. I was told stories that if you were walking on the wrong side of a street, you can get beaten up, just because you don't belong there. And so it was a very brief and completely illogical moment of terror where these 4 or 5 young men, probably in their late teens, early 20s, were coming towards me, and I panicked, and I'm like, what side of the peace line am I on? Am I on the Protestant side? Am I on the Catholic side? What if they say something to me? Can I outrun them? They seem pretty drunk. I certainly can't fight them. And by the time I'm sitting there sweating and shaking, and I get past them, and they didn't even know I was there. And the minute it happened, the minute I realized how ridiculous that fear was, but how powerful it also was, I became incredibly angry that Belfast had infected me that way. Belfast made me angry, and it was because of that. I felt like I was a victim of this constant kind of ingrained animosity and fear. What side of the walls are we on?
Belfast seemed different in one way from the other locales you described, because there's not one wall. There are dozens of them zigzagging throughout the city, and you described it. You used a really interesting metaphor. Belfast as a city with a kind of mental illness, the disease of self-harm, as if it had been cutting itself to hurt itself. What gave you that idea?
You look at a map of Belfast that has the peace lines, Belfast don't use the word peace lines very much. Interface barriers is more what they talk about, and how it cuts the city up with these tiny little kind of slashes here, right? And the walls, none of them are very, very long. Most of them aren't. There's a tiny little gate that blocks a road, or a fence behind a housing complex. But it was that kind of intimate little cuts that it seemed like they were like incisions to me, and it just reminded me of this carving away at the city. And in such a, and the self-harm element of that is that it didn't seem to be helping anything other than to kind of ossify this kind of hatred that exists there. It wasn't healing anything. It was doing more harm. For me, that metaphor really stuck. Because it seemed so like self-painful and self-inflicted trauma that didn't seem to be accomplishing much of anything other than to cause more pain.
And same with the riot you witnessed. It was very different from the Palestine riot too. In what way?
You know, the Palestinian demonstrations that I saw, the protesters and the stone throwers, they had a cause. You know, we want the wall around Jayus taken down. That was what they wanted. In Belfast, it was this anger at the parades that manifested itself into arson and violence and vandalism and attacking of the police, and there was no motivation. You know, it turned into this kind of almost like a pack of animals ripping apart the neighborhood.
And it's their own name.
That's the thing. The irony is when the parade marches by, the more calm protesters hold up signs saying, respect our neighborhood, get out, don't march through here, sort of thing. Meanwhile, as soon as that's done, then the neighborhood rips its own neighborhood apart. It tears down fence posts and throws at the police. It rips paving stones out of the ground and throws that at the police. They destroyed. They took a car and stole it, drove it in front of the police, lit it on fire. And that's a car that belongs to the neighborhood. It's not the police's car. It's not the Catholic or Protestant car. It was their own car. And it was ridiculous. And I asked the guy. I was there with a journalist, and I asked him, like, what if I went and looking at these kids with their faces covered, and they got Budweiser bottles filled with gasoline that they're making Molotov cocktails out. And so what if I asked that guy why he was doing that? And he said he would probably punch you in the face. Like it was down to pure. At that point, it was pure violence. I mean, there are activists working who are calmer about things, right? There's a lot of groups in Belfast trying to kind of mend fences, take down the walls. These weren't those people. These were just thugs.
Tell us what are some of the different functions of the walls around the world. I mean, most of them are nominally for security, but they obviously have other functions. Some of them are purely for greed. You make an argument that the Arizona border is actually serves more of a commercial purpose than any other. Some are to reinforce identities that were not strongly defined. Tell us about some of those varieties of purpose.
Yeah, the identity one is interesting too, because around Ceuta and Melilla, like I mentioned, the Spanish cities that are in North Africa, the fences are there nominally to keep out migrants from Africa and South Asia who believe that getting into one of these cities, because it is officially Europe, they are now in Europe and will be granted eventually visas to go to the mainland. Of course, it's not that easy. They've usually been lied to about how easy this is. So there's these incredibly complex fencing systems around these places. But they don't work. They don't work at all. People climb over them, they find ways to bribe their way in, they hide under trucks and all kinds of ways. They don't work. But what they do work as is they fortify the old prejudices between Europeans, especially Spaniards, and Arabs. That dates way back. And so the Europeans who live in Ceuta and Melilla are very sensitive about being referred to as Africans, or being referred to as that they live in Morocco. No, we don't live in Morocco. Morocco is for those savages. And here is this giant fencing system to show you this identity difference. That there's that side, and there's our side. There's the African Muslim Arabs, and there's us, the Catholic white Spanish Europeans, this side. And it's truly an identity thing. And then you see the opposite happen. And this was fascinating to me. Along the Indian-Bangladesh border, in one area, well, lots of that border, which is being fenced up slowly, there's an area that I visited where there's no difference in the people on one side than the other. They are Bengali Muslims who speak the same language, eat the same food, read the same books. People on one side will marry off their daughters to sons on the other side. You play cricket with your cousins over there. Sometimes the well that the village draws water from is across the border. The border meant nothing. In fact, for the most of the time, it was invisible. You couldn't even see the markers. These people had everything in common. And then the fence came, and a very simple fence, three strands of barbed wire come up. And all of a sudden, you hear Indian farmers saying things like, yeah, it's best we don't associate with those people anymore. Or, those people over there, they're becoming too Bangladeshi now. And I would ask these farmers, they're very simple rural guys, right? I'm like, what does that even mean? And they didn't know. They couldn't explain what that meant. But something was different now. And the only thing that was different was that there was 3 strands of barbed wire separated. And which showed to me kind of the incredible emotional power such a simple structure has. 3 strands of barbed wire changes how you think about your own relatives. They've suddenly become some kind of enemy. And it's the fence that does that. And that's an identity thing too.
And what about that, the function of the American wall, the Arizona-Mexico?
Yeah, I remember, the liberals hate it, the ultra right-wing conservatives hate it, and I remember asking them, well, why is it there? And this one activist in Tucson had told me, oh, Marcello, you have to squint your eyes and look through the prism of corporate greed, because it's all about money. The amount of money spent on maintaining and building the wall and the structures around it is incredible. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you think about $1 billion to the Boeing company who built an electronic wall that didn't work. The billions of dollars to maintain what is actually there. The billions of dollars to pay the Border Patrol, who are people who can't get into regular police work. I met some bartenders who were trying to be cops in Tucson, and they failed the cop test, so they're going to be Border Patrol. The bus company that carries kind of captured, deported migrants to and from the border, dumps them off, deports them. But especially the for-profit prison system, which kind of warehouses these migrants for an incredible amount of money, millions and millions of dollars a month, to warehouse migrants, people who are not Americans, for a few weeks and then deport them. Like the amount of money involved in that is incredible, and it's a boon to the economies of these places. And that's another reason why the walls come, because they generate income for certain companies.
I don't want to ask what your favorite one is. What I mean is, what was the worst? What do you think was the saddest one, or the one where people were suffering most from power crackling?
I was struck most by Belfast, like I said. Just how intimate the kind of the cutting of the city was, how it didn't seem to be accomplishing anything of value, how it seemed to be a waste of aggression, and how all the walls did this, but Belfast more than most, it propagated the fear and hatred that it was erected to defend against. The more walls, the more we were divided, the more the Belfast citizens are divided, and the more they hate each other, the more they distrust each other. We got to the point in Belfast where you don't have to have a personal vendetta against someone to throw a brick at his head. All you need is to know that he's from the other side of the wall. And that I saw nowhere else. Like that was incredible. I was struck by what I told you about how the Indian-Bangladesh border fencing, such a simple structure, had caused so much kind of emotional change in people. That was shocking to me. But really, I mean, of all of them, I think Belfast struck me with the most kind of sadness.
You talk about some places that aren't real in the book. There's a line, you write, the walls edge places that cannot be. In the Sahara, a berm tracks through a nation, the Saharan Arab Democratic Republic, that isn't real. And it's a kind of administrative entity that was invented and imposed on a place, like the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus also doesn't really exist. And you also say Palestine is less a place than an idea. What do you mean by that?
I got in trouble for that comment. It was taken out of context in a review, and I got savaged for it. What I meant is that here, it's a place that is still struggling for some sort of national recognition. Still struggling with its own sovereignty. Still struggling with what its borders should and will eventually, one hopes, be. And so we see what a lot of the walls, they fence these kind of weird areas of these geopolitical anomalies, like the Ceuta and Melilla too. They're Europe, but they're in Africa. It's these strange sort of things. So maybe it's what the fences do is help to define places that are undefinable, to lend like a physical barrier, a border, to a place that is more an idea than an actual political place.
Right. And it's interesting. So many of them were deserts too, like the Sahara in Arizona. There are no physical barriers there.
No.
Yeah. Now, you are very hard on the Israeli wall. You say it's not necessary or effective as a security barrier. What do you think its true function is?
Annexing Palestinian land, mostly for settlement expansion. There's that. I think it also serves as a. If you see a wall, you presume there's something dangerous on the other side. And I think it's an act of theater that portrays danger even if danger does not exist. You travel from, and the Israeli officials do this in different ways. I mean, if you want to go on a tour of Bethlehem, if you go with an Israeli like a tour group, they send armed guards with you, which are. No one else, which are utterly unnecessary, right? There's this portrayal, I believe, this theatrical portrayal of danger that doesn't exist, and I think the wall serves that. I think for the most part, though, like I said, I think it's about land. The idea that it has stopped suicide attacks is discounted. The value of the wall for that has been discounted even by members of the IDF and the Israeli Secret Service, who suggest that. The reasons for the drop in those kinds of attacks are multifold, and the wall is not a major one of them. So there's that. And you can't go to Jayus, this village that I talked about, without seeing quite clearly what the wall is doing. You have the village of Jayus here. You have all of the Jayus's ancestral farmland here, and then you have an Israeli settlement, Zufim, over here. If the wall was meant to protect the settlement, it would be over here. The wall is over here. It completely separates Palestinian farmers from their land, and no one's under any illusion that will be an expansion of Zufim into that space eventually. It's about real estate. Well, of course, people disagree. I get that there are those people who think that what I'm saying is madness, but the facts don't bear out the security effectiveness of the barrier.
And so many of the fences you describe are easily scalable. Not that one. That's a particularly daunting barrier, right? But you said that the Arizona fence could be climbed easily in certain places.
Could be walked through, like I did. Right. Climbed easily. Sometimes the Arizona fence is there to stop vehicles.
Right.
But even the West Bank wall. I mean, day laborers cross from Palestine into Israel to work every day. They sneak through gaps in the fence. There was a wonderful book written by a woman named Suad Amiri who spends a day pretending she's a man and sneaking into Israel to work. And it happens all the time. I think out of the, Palestine is effectively walled off, but those who want to get through, get through.
Speaking of real estate, tell us about the Montreal fence.
Yeah. Someone had told, I had no idea this thing existed until I was, halfway through the project, and someone asked if I was going to write about the Great Wall of Montreal. And it's a fascinating thing, because it's so in 1960, I believe it was, I don't know how well some of you know Montreal, but there's a wealthy neighborhood, and it was wealthy back then too, the town of Mount Royal. And it's right next to another neighborhood called Park Extension. And now, as in now, TMR was wealthy and Park X was poor. Park X has always been an immigrant community. Back in the day, it was Italians, Eastern Europeans, and Jews a lot, and there's none left there now. And now it's Africans and South Asians and Latin Americans. But it's always it's like a what Doug Saunders calls an arrival city, right? It's where new Canadians start, and it's poor. It's like the second poorest Canadian urban neighborhood after the downtown east side of Vancouver. So it's right next to TMR, which is a wealthy, green, lush. So in 1960, the road that divided the two communities was expanded and became one of these deadly Montreal highways. And so what the residents of TMR did is to protect their kids from running into the street and pets, they erected this very simple chain link fence. Some places it's 6 feet tall, some places it's less than that. But because it stood between a poor and a wealthy neighborhood, it automatically became this thing. It was seen as a economic divide, as a status thing, and racist. It was always seen as a racist fence too. A lot of the times, right? I met Jewish Montrealers whose family was there, and they felt that very, very keenly back in the day. And now it's, you're African and you're South Asian and the same sort of thing. So it's become this symbol of Montreal's disparity. And for a while, I felt bad for the people of TMR, because I honestly felt they erected that fence to keep their kids and their pets safe. And here it was turned into this big thing. Some people compared it to a concentration camp enclosure. The hyperbole around it is ridiculous. And in the 60s too, a bunch of kind of left-wingers from the University of Montreal tore it down. And then it was erected the next day, rewritten. But I stopped feeling so bad for the TMR when I found out that they had started locking the gates to the fence during Halloween, so that kids from the poor neighborhood couldn't go trick-or-treating in the rich neighborhood. And everyone in the poor neighborhood knew that that's where you get the best chocolate bars. It was the rich neighborhood. And even there was one house that the woman who lived there, she was a cosmetics rep. And so the moms who brought their kids out would get free cosmetic samples too. Like everyone wanted to go trick-or-treating in TMR. But they started locking the gates in the late 90s and early 2000s. And it was even mentioned in the House of Commons. In question period, someone stood up and railed against this kind of economic apartheid going on between these two neighbors. So I felt less. The gates are open now; they don't lock them. At one point, they took them out, and then the new mayor, TMR has their own little mayor. The mayor who pulled them out when she lost her re-election bid, the new mayor put them back in. There's something about the population of TMR, which has changed since back in the 60s, but they still want that fence there and those gates in. The thing is that new people in Park X, your newly arrived Bengalis, your newly arrived people from Cote d'Ivoire, they don't care about that fence. They don't even see it. They have no reason to go to TMR other than on Halloween. So for them, it's not a thing. They're too busy working hard, to worry about this kind of nonsense. But it comes up all the time. Not all the time. It comes up every time there's discussion and protests about economic disparity in Montreal. They'll go to the fence. And it's not surprisingly, no one in TMR wanted to talk to me about it.
You talk about the paradox of globalization happening at the same time as the rise of walls. So technology has in many ways made us borderless. It's impossible to contain information and communication with a wall. So are the walls being rendered obsolete by technology in some way? I mean, is that what might bring the walls down?
No, I'd like to think so, but I don't. I mean, I think because of the other purposes the walls serve, those reasons will maintain them. Yeah, the walls don't stand as a bulwark against, or you know, the borders themselves are becoming more and more meaningless. But you know, with global fears of terrorism, of the idea of sovereignty, waning ideas of sovereignty, I think people want, or governments want, some sort of physical manifestation of power, some sort of physical manifestation of strength. There's a great quote from an Indian economist in here who was talking about the fencing of the Indian-Bangladesh border, and he said that, I'm paraphrasing, he said something along the lines of, no, the idea to fence up the Indian-Bangladesh border is an absolutely absurd idea. It is also, however, a splendid one, because you know, to do something that fails is better than not doing anything at all. It's this illusion that we can create to make certain people happy.
A heroic gesture of a kind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I don't think the walls rising are being countered by kind of this digital wall-less culture that we live in. Yeah, I mean, none of the things I listed things we're afraid of that are borderless, and since then we add Ebola and ISIS to the list, right? These are not bordered phenomena. Climate change, but the walls, the purpose that they serve, whether it's symbolic or not, remains.
You end the book though on a very optimistic note, as we heard. You're saying, you know, as long as people build walls, we're going to want to tear them down, and they do tend to come down. And yet, not one of the walls you've described is in any risk of coming down soon.
No, that's true. Yeah, you know, I could have ended the book two different ways. I could have also said, even though there's an impulse to tear them down, they keep going up, which is the mirror opposite way.
Glass half full.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and I think too, in honor of the people that I met, and the book is really about the people who I met. This is a collection of stories of people who live there, right? I owe so much. I owe this whole thing to people who sat me down, like Ophelia, and told me these amazing stories. In their honor, I wanted to end it in a positive note. For those who will work so hard, like I read at the end there, to alleviate the suffering, to subvert the walls, you know, I can't. For their sakes, I have to imagine that the walls will come down, even if sometimes it feels like that is an incredible naive notion. And it does. It feels like a naive notion. What have we learned in the 25 years since the Berlin Wall came down? There's more walls now than there was before. There's more walls in Belfast now than after the Good Friday Accord. Peace in Northern Ireland, there's more walls now. So it's hard to be optimistic, but I think we owe it to those who suffer there and who work hard to try and be.
Let's break down this wall and ask questions from the audience. Jump to the back.
I have two questions. How did you narrow down your list of walls in the early stages? And my second question would be, what is the most, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when I'm asking you about the most positive experience in the entire trip?
Okay, how I narrowed it down. Like I said, I had loads of them, right? And I described some of them in the beginning there. I think it came down to, I was afraid that I'd be repeating myself in places. You know, an anti-immigration wall here is essentially the same story as an anti-immigration wall there, right? So that's kind of where I knocked him out. There's a few that I wish I had gone to. I mean, the Koreas is one that I wanted to go to, and I wanted to write about gated communities in Johannesburg as well, and I think that's one I regret the most, not going to see. So that I narrowed it down because I didn't want to be telling the same story over and over again. As far as favorite, or no, most positive. Is that way? Well, no, I'll tell you. I've written. This is my third book. I read a pile of magazine stuff, and most of my stuff that I write is based on my travels abroad, and you know, the stories of other people outside of Canada. The most positive experience was kind of realizing during the research of this book what an incredible gift people give to writers by letting them into their lives. And you get this kind of backstage pass into people's personal lives, right? That is completely unearned. You know, I'm not, no one knows who I am. I don't have any kind of name behind me, no kind of name recognition. But at the same time, I call someone up and say, hey, I'm a writer, can I come to your house? And can you tell me secrets about your life? And they say, absolutely. And that to me was the most positive thing, because I got it all the time. Some people ask me, did you have a hard time getting people to talk? No, absolutely not. I mean, especially those who feel that the walls they are victims of walling, right? Those people want to tell their stories. But people were so open with their stuff. Maybe that's something about being human, is that we desperately want people to ask us about our lives. And maybe it's an ego thing. Maybe we really want to talk about ourselves. And I just gave them the opportunity. But it's something I certainly don't take for granted, and I'm incredibly grateful for that.
There's a question there.
Yeah, who's erecting the Belfast walls now? How does that happen? Is it like local communities put them up, or is
Yeah.
it regional government, or?
There's a couple. There's a housing commission. I forget the name, but kind of like a government body, like a civil government body, and who put up walls whenever they feel like someone needs some sort of barricade somewhere. But also, even any new building, like a new apartment building, they just throw a wall next to it if it's close to an interface area, just in case. Like it's part of this. It's part of the infrastructure of the city. I tell a story in this book about I went to visit a Sikh temple in Belfast because I wanted to talk to people who had no relationship whatsoever with Protestant and Catholic, divide. These are these Punjabi Sikh guys who somehow ended up in Belfast, and they had this temple in like one of the worst areas. That's the one they were kind of given this. Here you can have this place, and so someone threw rocks through their windows, just pure racist reasons. And they got their windows smashed. And so they called the police, and the police came, and they replaced the window, and then they built a wall for them in front of the window, so that no one would throw another rock through the window. And I'm like that to me is incredible. But that's just how things work in Belfast, right? You put a lock on it, you put a wall in front of it. And I said to this guy, this Sikh guy, I'm like, in Canada, if someone throws a rock through the window, they're going to try to find the guy through the rock. And he goes, yes, but here there are too many rocks.
How close is the wall to the window?
Some places I saw, like it blocks out the sun. I mean, I visited with this elderly couple, and they have this giant wall behind their house, and so they don't see the sun through their back window. And they're happy that it's there. Occasionally a bottle comes flying over it. So they not happy that's exaggerating. They feel a necessity for it. I'm not sure if that's a legitimate. I'm not sure if their life would be terrible if the wall wasn't there. If they would be, I don't think that all of a sudden if that wall came down, their house would be destroyed or shelled or firebombed. I mean, those days are over, but they're happy it's there.
More questions?
I have a really burning one. And it's funny that I have to hear all this for this to occur to me for the first time in my life, I guess. I guess we all, on some level, agree that all walls are bad. In your, going back to your long list, or even a projection of potential coming walls, have you ever encountered that moment where you went, okay, now here's maybe a good raison d'etre in terms of security, like if we could build a wall against ISIS, would we all quickly pull it up in Kurdistan? Or have you ever encountered that, or are they really as absurd as it's starting to hit me now?
The short answer is no. I never found any that were in the whole positive, right? I mean, I mentioned that this couple in Belfast who wanted the walls.
Belfast is borderline where civic society has dissolved. That's really
Yeah. I mean, there are certainly people who feel they are being protected by their barrier. And so it's hard for me to come in from Canada and say, no, that wall is wrong, tear it down. But in the whole, as a system, I feel I never saw anywhere where the wall was doing more good than harm. At the very least, the walls perpetuate ongoing hatred. I mean, when I went to Cyprus, to the capital of Nicosia, and I thought, okay, here's going to be my lighthearted chapter. This is going to be the funny chapter, because there's nothing here, like there hasn't been a shot fired over that wall in a generation. Well, not for decades. It's falling apart. It seems so ridiculous. But no, it wasn't funny at all. I mean, it was this hereditary. Parents passed on their fear of Greeks and Turks to their kids, who then passed it on, who they propagated it, right? There was this woman I met who talked about how she gets nervous when she hears, she was on the Greek side, she feels nervous when she hears when the Turks have like a fireworks or some sort of celebration on the Turkish side, because I think it's gun, it sounds like gunfire. She's never heard a gun. She's never heard a gun. And yet, it's that fear. And she said to me, and she's a very intelligent woman, who is at Oxford right now studying creative writing, I think. And she's just a journalist. She used to be a journalist, and she was saying that she's somehow happy that the wall is there. And I'm saying, why? And she couldn't say why. She's just kind of relieved that it's there. And she has no personal experience with anyone coming across that line, and yet she's kind of happy that it's there, because she's learned, and she's very secular, very liberal-minded, but she's learned that you don't trust Turks, and there's Turks over there. And I found the same attitude on the other side about Greeks. No, we just leave that thing there.
Sure. There was a question over here.
How do you think people feel about the ruins of walls, like the Berlin Wall and the Wailing Wall and other walls?
How do people think about that? I don't know. I mean, they're all different, right? I mean, the Western Wall in Israel is still the most holy place in Judaism. Like it's still relevant as a place for Jews to gather and pray. The Berlin Wall is a little bit different. I mean, the Berlin Wall, the shards that remain, either in Berlin or Montreal shopping malls, kind of represent this kind of fall of the Cold War. Those walls, that is it's a symbol of kind of victory, right? Those shards are a symbol of victory. And we look at them to I think to remind ourselves, that we succeeded, we won the Cold War, or better heads finally prevailed. There's that. Some of them are purely touristic, right? I mean, the Great Wall of China. How many people who go on it really know what it did and what it didn't do? And it was a failure as well. Hadrian's Wall, no one even really knows what it's for. It's a nice hike. I asked some guys in the Sahrawi refugee camps in the Western Sahara, like if there's peace, because that wall is built out of sand. Literally, it's like a hump of sand. And I said, "What will you guys do with the wall?" And he goes, "Well, we'll probably leave it kind of as a souvenir of the conflict, right? But it won't last. Like eventually, sandstorms will, in 20 years, the desert will completely reclaim it." I don't know. I mean, I think people, the walls are symbols to people in different ways. The ones that are coming up, but I can't think of very many that are no longer in use. Right?
You do talk in the book about people who use the wall for art projects, and then there's the Arizona-Mexico border guy makes music.
I love that guy.
Yeah. What does he do?
He plays the wall.
Yeah.
I love Glenn. I mean, he's one of my favorite people that I met, and Glenn Wayant is his name. He's a kind of avant-garde musician guy in Tucson, and he thought he wanted to find out what the wall sounded like, because he's a percussionist. So what he does at first is he goes down to the wall and he attaches like a contact microphone onto these metal panels, right, in Nogales. He attaches the contact microphone and wires it up to an amplifier and speaker, and he puts on headphones. And he didn't realize how much it looked like a bomb. Until like the border patrol goes crazy and flying in. And he kind of explained to them that he's just trying to play it. And they took down his license plate number and left him alone. And he makes these incredible recordings. And so he attaches a microphone to it. He plays it with drumsticks, and he bows parts of it with a cello bow. He does all this crazy stuff, and it's not music. It's not melody or anything like that. It's just these kind of strange, kind of moaning, whining sounds. It's very avant-garde. It sounds like some people tell him it's the worst thing they've ever heard in their life. and it kind of is terrible sounding. But it's this idea, like, for him, it's a kind of almost a political act. No, not almost. It's a political act. He's saying if America, the big mean America is going to build this $1 billion thing that doesn't work, I'm going to transform it into a musical instrument. And in a way, he's taking it down. He's subverting it by turning it into something that it is not. What's amazing, the most amazing thing about that, though, is that when you got the microphone on it and it's hooked up to the speaker, it makes noise even when it's not being played, just because the vibrations that exist through everything, matter, and so it hums and moans even when it's still, because it's not still. But it vibrates with noise from either side equally, right? So those sounds, in a way, it unifies both sides. For the wall that's meant there to divide, really, when it comes down to this kind of vibration, it really unites, because the wall doesn't know the difference between Mexican vibrations and American vibrations. So the sound that comes through is this kind of unity thing, which I thought was really kind of poetic and beautiful. I mean, it doesn't sound beautiful; it sounds terrible. But it really is. It was a really kind of a magical thing. And he puts these symphonies together, and he includes sounds from Border Patrol helicopters and dogs barking on the Mexican side, and he makes these very interesting, strange kind of recordings that he sells and donates some money to one of these kind of border activist groups. And I played a duet with him when I was there.
Yeah, Anwar?
Are walls around enclaves any different than walls that aren't? It's like, there's a straight wall between separating two territories any different? Or is the enclave wall I'm asking about, is it in any way characteristics any different than a wall that's...
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that. I don't know if if you look at, for enclaves, I think it was Ceuta and Melilla or my enclaves, but those are still international borders, so that's not that doesn't answer your question. The enclave, certainly Belfast.
Would have been one.
Sorry?
Berlin would have been
Berlin.
one. The rest of the border in Germany wasn't, but Berlin was, and I remember that because of the transit hall, because you had to go through the GDR to get from West Germany to West Berlin, although technically West Berlin was connected, right?
But it was still an international border. No, it was still considered that, was it not? Through Berlin? Didn't at the time wasn't that considered to be between East and West? That was.
But West Berlin was part of West Germany, but that was over there, so you had to go.
Okay, so you're saying part of, yes,
so in a way that's
It
close
was
to
a corridor
one
that
another,
was
right?
like an airlock.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So you had several border crossings to get from
Right,
West
right,
Germany to West Berlin, which was technically my country, but,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, then I guess the enclaves would, Belfast would be these sorts of things, where you have these kind of enclave neighborhoods that are kind of these tiny pockets of people with co-religionists who are that's where they stay, and so the effect ends up being kind of the same in a very weird way, where you have these young people in these neighborhoods in North Belfast who never leave their neighborhood. It might as well be another country on the other side. These they grow up. They don't play with kids on the other side. They don't cross. They have their library and their school and their swimming pool and whatever it is that's for their community, and they don't feel a need to leave. When they get older, sometimes they'll work downtown, which is kind of a neutral area, except for the pubs, which you have to pick which pub you want to support. But it's office towers where all the communities will work, but then they'll return home to their enclave, and that's where their living happens, right? I mean, there was an area called Ardoyne, and a friend of mine there, he coined a phrase. The INLA, which used to mean the Irish National Liberation Army, and now he says, "I never leave Ardoyne." That's for him. It was these, because these kids really grow up in these kind of weird sorts of tiny communities, and maybe we all do that as kids. For the most part, we don't drift past the main road when we're growing up. But there, they can't. There's either a locked gate or a wall, and if they dare cross it, they get hit in the head with a stone by the kid on the other side. So what you get is these very territorial kids who are afraid to cross, and also feel they need to defend their territory. And that's what happens when there's these fights. Where there'll be someone will dare to cross in, and so there's this defending of our territory, and it starts with teenagers. That's who's fighting in Belfast right now. It's not armed militias anymore, and it's not bombs and guns. It's rocks and fists and bottles. And what starts off as two kids having a fight at the interface and turns into a 40-person riot that the police have to come in and tear gas. And that happens all the time. They'll pick fights on Facebook. And how do you stop that? You know, if a loyalist kid's fighting with a kid on the other side of the wall and they meet on Facebook, or they meet playing Call of Duty, you know, they play online video games, and they can actually talk to each other on the thing, and they will actually set up real fights as they play Call of Duty. They'll like hit pause and go try to kick each other's ass. It's a remarkable situation. And how do you stop that when you are constantly reminded that you're different from the person on the other side by this big thing that's blocking the sunlight into your house? And there are people who are working, like there's so many great activists in Belfast, more than any other place I went to. There's so many groups working on changing things. They're having a hell of a time.
Okay. Thanks, Marcello.
Thank you.